Today I want to look about how we are journeying in grace on this road that God puts us on, that we are renewed by mercy. This journey that takes us from where we were into where God wants us to be. This journey that leads us into a new life. This morning we heard from the letter of the Ephesians. Now, we believe that this letter was written to a Gentile church, not to people who were Jewish, but who weren't. And they were now followers of Christ. And there was that transition in the early church where the first believers were also Jewish, and then it shifted to where more people who were not Jewish were coming to follow Christ. And so their lives were to change quite differently because they didn't have the basic understanding of the people who were following God, who were Jewish first. And so this letter is written to them to sort of help them see who you were is not who you should be now. But rather there should be a change that has taken place in your life. A change because Christ has come into your life. And that is where we hear the start of this part of the scripture. Once you were in darkness, but now you are in the light of the Lord. Paul is telling us that our identities are changed, that we are no longer defined by our past and by our failures. We once were in darkness, you now are in light. When you're in those different places, you see things differently. You act differently. You move differently. You see differently. You act differently. We all know that just by walking around our house in the middle of the night. Any of you ever walked through the house without any lights on? Do you walk just as fast as you do in the daylight? I don't. If I do, I usually run into something. You know, something that was there that I didn't remember was there, especially if I rearrange things and an end table happened to be where there once was a pathway. That hurts. And what happens then is when we move from that point, when a part of our lives or all of our lives were lived in darkness, now in which we live them in the light of Christ, it is so easy for us to remember who we were, not who we are. The grace of God is one that brings us to the place that we no longer have to define ourselves by what we did or even the failures we believed we had. Because now we are in the light of the Lord. Now, does that mean that we have absolutely no consequences for what we previously did? No. But wouldn't that be great? But that's not the way it works. Right? We move from light to darkness, but we still have the bruises on us that happened when we walked through the house at night, right? You walk and you turn a corner because you think the door is sooner than it is, and you run into the wall. I hate to admit it, but I do that sometimes in the office. I'm like, I don't want to turn on any lights. I'll make it right out of the door, no problem. Boom. Oh. Nope, that door was a little closer than I thought. Or I'd be walking out looking for the door, right? Because you come right out of the office and then there's the door to the hallway. And so I think I'm making it to the door. Boom. Mm-mm. Sometimes my foot goes first. That really hurts. And then I go and I walk out and all of a sudden there's light outside. The Even if it's dark out, the light is there, and it would be great if I suffered none of the consequences of trying to stumble around in the darkness. But if I hit my foot against the wall, it still hurts. Our lives are that way. We wish sometimes that we didn't carry the consequences, the hurts, and the pains of what moves us into the present and when we walk in the light. But they stay there. But what doesn't stay there is how we can define ourselves. We no longer have to define ourselves as someone who stumbled in the darkness. Rather, we just were someone who stumbled in the darkness. Do you see the difference? That's what the light of Christ offers to us. One not in which we condemn ourselves, but one in which we now can start to live differently because the light of Christ is illumining different parts of our life. And so Paul goes on to say, yes, you were once in darkness, but now you live in the light of the Lord. So live your life as children of light. Live your life as children of light. We hear this phrase of lightness and darkness, especially in the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus tells his followers that you are the light. And there's the children's song. I was just thinking about that because of yesterday and all different children's songs that were running through my head. You know, are you going to put your light under the bushel basket? No! I'm going to let it shine. Gonna hide the light under the bushel basket? No! I'm gonna let it shine. Right? So we live as people of the light that shine this light, not because it is ours, but because it is put there by God. We can either think of it as we are a lantern, and God is the light that shines out, so it certainly looks like the lantern is giving us the light, right? But it's not. It's just the vessel that carries the light. Or others see it as the image of a mirror, that yes, we reflect God's light. It is not ours, but it seems as if it is still coming from us. So when we live in the light, our choices and our habits begin to reflect God's goodness. Now, I wish I could say that when we live in the light, our choices and our habits do always reflect God's goodness. But I don't know about you. Sometimes there's still a little darkness in me. And there's probably still a little darkness of each of you. And so even though we wish to say, I really want to always do it, the reality is sometimes our choices and our habits don't. But when we live in the light, we start growing in our choices and our behaviors that reflect God's goodness. It's a choice of whether or not we really want to live in the light that God offers to us, or are we pulled aside by other things that are not the light of Christ? This is not easy stuff. It's simple, right? Just live as children of the light. Well, I think if it was simple, we'd already be doing it. But God calls us to reflect this goodness. That is how people know who God is and what the love of God is about. We can live as children of the light. No longer need to live in darkness. We can choose to, but we don't have to. How are you reflecting God's goodness in your life? That should be a question that you ask yourselves daily. How am I reflecting God's goodness in what I do? Or am I reflecting something else that is not of God? Now, when you ask yourself that question, let me tell you something. If the answer is, I am only reflecting God's goodness, there are two options. One, you're perfect. Two, you're trying to fool yourself. Those are the two options. Right? Either we're totally reflecting God's light or we're not. If we're not, then we have to admit that, because when we admit it now, our habits and our choices can start to be changed. The Lord can work in our hearts and our minds so that we start to reflect God's goodness more and more and more. Then God calls us to see that what we thought was reflecting was God's goodness was actually something else. And so now we can adjust and change, and so now our choices and our habits change again because we're reflecting more of God's light, and this continues to go. And Paul then continues to say, light produces fruit that consists of every kind of goodness, righteousness, and truth. If we are living in the light, what happens is that grace, God's love, makes our actions full of love and goodness. Right? When Paul says light produces fruit, the fruit are actions. There's something that's visible. There's something that people can see and grab onto. And that fruit is goodness and righteousness and truth. That's what the light produces in us. Now, for those of you who are English majors at one time, you're probably going, this is a mixed metaphor, Paul. You should not write this way, right? Because it's not real. It's mixing light and darkness and what our actions are, but the reality is that's the truth, is that when God's love comes within our lives, it makes our actions full of love and grace, or at least starts to move us so that our actions are full of love and grace. And it's important that we're doing this because Paul continues, right? You are children of the light. Live your life that way. This light is going to produce fruit of every kind of goodness, righteousness, and truth. Therefore, test everything to see what is pleasing to the Lord, and don't participate in unfruitful actions of darkness. What Paul is telling us is that pleasing God, living in the light, is by our actions, not just by knowing what is right. When Paul is writing, test everything you see, whether it's pleasing to the Lord, he's inviting us into an action. He's inviting us into an action of light to see if what we believe the Lord is doing is something that is happening, is good and just and kind. And that as we find out more what is good and just and kind and truthful, then we no longer participate, which is an action. You can't participate by thinking. I know that. I've tried. Maybe you've tried something similar to this, and it's kind of funny. You know, there are some of us who are really good in athletics all the time. They pick up anything, they are great. That is not me. Now, some of you know about the game of golf. Others of you go, I don't want to hear about sports anymore. But just hold on for me for a moment. Right? I know how to swing a golf club. I have studied how to swing a golf club. I can give you the answers of how to swing a golf club. But when I swing a golf club, it is not the same. My ball does not go straight like it's supposed to. If it goes off the tee many times, it would take an extreme, hard right turn. I'm not talking gentle right turn. I'm talking straight and to the right. It is going nowhere where it needs to be. Now, that's the difference between knowing what is right and participating in what is right. Have you had areas in your life where that's the case? Now, if we bring it down into something that's more pertinent to everyday life, have you ever walked into having a conversation with somebody that you knew was going to be difficult, and you had it all planned out in your head, and you get in there and none of that happened? You went in there knowing what was the right thing to say, what was the right thing to do, that you were going to pause, that you were going to listen, that you were going to let the other person speak, that you weren't going to talk over them. And then something happened and that all went out the window. We're not to participate in the unfruitful actions of darkness. But what happens is we have to practice that and test that and know that, because we please God when our actions are right, not just by knowing what is right. It's not about a right belief only. It's about being able to live that belief in which it transforms our life into action, in which now we are light. And Paul ends the passage this way. Everything that is revealed by the light is light. Therefore it says, wake up, sleeper. Get up from the dead, as Christ will shine in you. Those therefores come from the prophet Isaiah. But he's telling them, look, wake up. If everything revealed by the light is light, if everything that is in you that was darkness is now shown in the light, guess what? God invites us to move beyond what we just feel comfortable with and invites us to step into new life and growth. And this, my friends, isn't easy, is it? Because we never stop growing. If the light shines in us, we continue to grow. And every time God is saying to us, wake up. If God was a little more earthly, there'd probably be a few words in between waking up. Because that's really the intent. Come on, wake up. You know what's in the light. Walk in the light. Stop sleeping. Get up. Go. Show this goodness. Show this love. Show this truth. Get up. Move. Because then, as we do, Christ will continue to shine on you. But it's this new life and growth part that we have a problem with. I really do believe that we do. Because what happens is we get to feel comfortable in what we're doing. We know our routines. Any of you have a morning routine? How do you feel when your routine gets disrupted? Some people more than others. If I have in my mind what's going to be happening, and something happens, and we deviate, and I have to deviate from that, I have to do a lot of mental gymnastics just to sort of feel better about what's going on. I like what's comfortable. I like knowing what I believe is true. I like believing that everything I do is good. I like to believe that everything I say is true, because then I can be comfortable. Everything's good. I don't need any growth. I don't need any change. Let me just sit and rest, because life is good. The problem with that is God is always a God of the present, moving forward, inviting us into what God is doing, and we can't move when we are sitting comfortably. I believe Paul's message of waking up, sleeper, get up from the dead, and Christ will shine on you, is as important today as it was then, and speaks as much to us as to others. For it's sad to say, I believe that it is so easy just to sleep. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't places where you are awake at the same time. This is crazy stuff, I know. Because how can I be awake? Okay, that's what happens when you're awake and asleep at the same time. See, I just created new words. Many times we're awake, right? But we are awake and asleep at the exact same time. Because there are parts of our lives when we could say, no, I am not sleeping at all. I know where the Lord is working. I know what we are doing is making a difference. I know that I can see the light of Christ that shines through us, even if it's taken a while to get there. For those of you who were started with the Coffee and Friends, remember that was about a year ago almost now. Remember that part of the reason why you started it was because you wanted to make sure the people who were lonely found a place that they could come and that they could actually feel as if they would have a place. Well, this Wednesday somebody came in and actually stated that was the reason why they were coming. See, when you wake up, when you do something, you may not know that it makes a difference, but when the light of Christ is shining on it, when we wait and it happens, we're like, yes, I am not asleep there. However, we're probably asleep somewhere else. And so we need to wake up. We need to wake up because when we do not hide our light under the bushel basket, when we become people who live in the light together, we shine into the darkness. When we complain that, oh, the world is going to the dogs, or whatever metaphor you want to say. When we complain that, well, you know what, our community just isn't what it used to be. You know there's a lot more of these negative things going on. Well, if that's the case, then there's a whole lot of place where light needs to shine into the darkness. And so when we see darkness, we can be the light. When we allow ourselves to live into the light, so our darkness is illuminated within us. So I just want to ask you a few questions. Just reflect on these rhetorically. See where the Lord leads you so that maybe you can get to a place where you are working more in the light. Where do you feel most asleep or maybe even numb in your life? Sometimes we can't see where we're asleep, but we know where that feeling of just is. Do you know that feeling of numbness? It's just like, whatever. Where in your life are you the most asleep or numb right now? This isn't so that we can judge ourselves negatively, but rather so that it is a place where God is inviting us to walk into God's grace and walk into the light. Because when we realize that, right, where are we numb, where are we asleep, then we can ask ourselves, what small awakening is God inviting me towards? Sometimes we know where we're asleep. We know where the darkness is. We know where we're numb, not because we know where that is, but rather because we feel God stirring something inside of us. Awakening something that we didn't know is there, inviting us to partner in a way that maybe we're not sure we want to do. But that's where the light starts to come. And then really, this week, how might you walk as a child of the light? How is God asking you to bring the light of goodness, of righteousness, and of truth into the world in a way that is not judgmental, but is gentle with grace, just as God is gentle with us? So this week, I ask you, just choose one habit or choice that you'll adjust to better reflect the light of Christ. And when you do, I just ask you to notice, maybe even write down in a journal if that's something that's meaningful to you, how that small change really changes the way you shape your day. Because sometimes just one small little change can make a huge difference. I'm going to say this prayer, and if this prayer resonates with you, just join with me in your own heart and mind. Or maybe there's another prayer that God is laying on your heart. And if that's the case, then please pray that one instead. God, help me to see myself the way you see me, as a child of light. Soften the harsh expectations I have of myself. Awaken what has gone to sleep in me. Guide my choices so that they reflect your goodness. Help me live as light in the world.